When most people watch a dedicated practitioner move, what they're drawn to is the flow, the way a dozen different techniques are blended together to create a smooth and seamless run. And it looks like a line from the outside, but really it's a series of isolated points, like footprints, and you're not connecting the dots, you're just moving between them. Virtually every movement in parkour comes from just 4 points of contact with the environment. There are exceptions like rolling, but most of the time, if you're going from point A to point B, it's all happening at the palms of your hands and the soles of your shoes. Don't get me wrong, the same is true for a lot of movement disciplines. Gymnasts, climbers, and even more traditional athletes. Our feet and our hands are the best tools in pretty much any physical endeavour. But there's something special about the way a tracer makes contact with the world. It's not bar 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 mat like a gymnast, but instead in a single run we might come into contact with a dozen different surfaces, ranging from concrete to asphalt to gravel, metal, brick or plastic. Sometimes the points are predetermined, like in a rail jump where there is exactly one possible landing spot, but other times a tracer has to decide. Do I go for the better grip that's farther away, or do I take the slick platform that's easier to reach? Should I move in larger, faster and more ambitious bounds, or do I take extra footfalls for a slower but safer path? And it's a cascading change of decisions, with each choice opening up some possibilities while closing down some others. When you're planning out a run, you have to think in terms of each individual step. The placement of each hand, if I use my right foot here, that means I'll be putting my left foot there, and it's a deeply intimate connection. In parkour, like in no other sport, it's considered not only acceptable, but expected that you'll cut up your wrists, destroy your shoes, get holes in your trousers. A single pebble can mean the difference between a grip that holds and one that slips. One brick too slick or too rough can throw off all the momentum you've worked to build up. At the start of a run, you may be thinking about your overall path, but pretty quickly the world shrinks down to about 6 inches wide. That tiny patch of wall that you have to grab and hang on to if you're going to keep from falling. For the next heartbeat, it's the only part of the world that matters. As far as your movement is concerned, it's the only part of the world that exists. There are a lot of different ways to slice up parkour into different categories, but when you think about it this way, it breaks down across 2 axes. You've got hands, feet, and all 4 limbs, crisscrossing either simultaneously or in sequence. We can think about the movements that involve both feet working at the same time, like standing jumps and precision landings, or we can think about the movements which use both feet in alternation, which is your strides and your basic run. Likewise, lashes and cat passes use both hands at the same time, while thief and dash vaults alternate them. Then you have things like arm jumps and running wall pops, the classic parkour movements. 4 points of contact, each of which has to be precisely timed and targeted and in perfect sync with the others, even on a wide and friendly wall, and it only gets trickier if the obstacle is unusual in any way. A lot of the training in parkour is actually building up instinct for these points of contact. There are 2 sides, of course, the environment and your own technique. The best tracers are the ones who are quick judges of the former and have complete control over the latter. People who can size up a wall or a rail at a glance and know exactly how to adjust their technique to compensate for slickness, narrowness, wobbliness, fragility, or other environmental hazards. It's never just a jump when you get to the level where you start thinking about serious gaps or height. Questions about grip and stability become your only focus. When you see a tracer awkwardly clamber over the side of an arm jump to test it out before he does it for real, it's not because he doubts his ability to jump across, it's because he needs to feel the surface, he needs that moment of touch, so he can understand it on a visceral level before he can really convince himself it's safe to do. Think about rock climbers and the intimate connection they have with a rock wall, literally hugging it as they climb their way up the face. Our task is usually not so subtle, but the same principles apply. A rock climber knows that you can and can't trust the way a certain crack or hold looks. You have to feel it, run your fingers across it, and make that connection. What looks sturdy might actually be brittle. What appears wonderfully grippy could be just as porous and crumbly. A tracer's connection with any particular piece of the environment is brief and fleeting, but nevertheless crucial. In a run, you're like a boulder rolling downhill. You can change direction, but not by working against the movement. You have to go with the flow, nudging yourself, controlling and channeling and redirecting the momentum you've built up. And if you're counting on a given step to give you this much of a push in a new direction, but that step gives you something else because you misjudged the way an obstacle was going to interact with your foot, it may already be too late. You have to truly understand the surfaces around you, because they make up half of your toolkit, and they're only useful tools if you know what you can and cannot do with them. The real challenge of parkour comes from the fact that half of your split-second decisions aren't even truly decisions at all, because they're muscle memory, they're reflex action, and best guesses. Like with a cricket match, the ball is pitched so fast that there's not really much time to react consciously. You have to swing and let your body guide you. Think of a precision jump. It takes about a second, but if you were to break it down into a set of individual instructions, you'd be there for hours explaining it. Even at just the endpoints and the 2 points of contact, there are too many things at once to hold in your head. And that's where the ability to put your mind into your feet really comes into play. Your feet can serve as sensors, gathering information your eyes can't pick up. They can tell you if something is too slippy or too grippy, or if it's wobbly, or if it's slanted. It starts with your initial placement. There's a very specific position that gives you the most power and control as you prepare for a precision jump. You want to have your feet close together, but not too close, and you want the point of contact to be just at the front of the balls of your feet. So as you bend your knees and lean forward to take off, your foot rolls around the edge of your surface and your toes contribute to the fine-tuning of the jump. You take off at roughly a 45-degree angle, which maximises your conversion of height into distance. And on the far side, you need to come in at a similar angle. If you're too steep, you'll fall backwards, or too flat and you'll fall forwards. You want to land just behind the ball of your foot this time, so that as you absorb the shock and kill your forward momentum, you end up right on the sweet spot where you have the best balance and the greatest control. All of these variables are important, and they're all connected in ways that are far too complex for you to take full conscious control over. Things happen too quickly. For example, it's very easy to be slightly too strong or too weak on your jump, and then have to compensate with your landing. But it's not like you can slow down and be more precise when you take off. It happens as you're leaning forward. And once you're already past the point of no return, if you undershoot or overshoot, too bad, you've committed to leaving the rail one way or the other. And the landing is even more complex, because you're not starting from a stationary and stable position. In the end, it all boils down to that split second when you first make contact and you and the surface start to dance. Do it right and your landing will be good, or at least passable, but do it wrong and the next adjustment you make will be all about fixing that technique. This is why many tracers spend hundreds of hours repeating similar jumps. Like with a cricket player practicing his swing, we're doing two things: exposing ourselves to a full range of possibilities and trying to lock in our best technique, so that when we're beyond thought, our bodies can reflexively pull out the correct response. That sensitivity, the ability to feel a surface and correctly judge its nature, and then react accordingly in the blink of an eye, it only comes with experience. And it really is all in the points of contact. It's not dependent on your eyes and your ears. They're the generals, directing the overall campaign, but it's your palms and your soles of your shoes that are literally on the ground. Much of the time, you don't even look at your targets. When was the last time you stared at your feet for every step of a run? Sometimes you have to prioritise. Like in an arm jump, the landing space for your hands takes precedence. You have to trust your feet to take care of themselves. Other times, the movement itself forces you to act blindly. Speed in thief faults, for example, one or both hands is literally behind you, and you know where it should be placed, but you aren't actively looking at it. You're relying purely on your proprioception to place that hand for you and ensure a successful vault, and the information you get during that vault will only come from that back hand. That's why we don't wear gloves, and why we always seek out flexible and grippy shoes. The more you isolate yourself from the surfaces, the less data you have to work with as you interact with your environment. If you'll forgive the metaphor, what you're doing is establishing a relationship with the environment, and the closer that relationship is, the better a chance you have for it to be successful. Think about climbing, especially at night, which is a favourite challenge for many traceurs. The rule of thumb for climbing in general is always keep 3 points on the wall at all times, not always keep eyes on what you're doing. If you're scaling a building or climbing scaffolding in the dark, it won't be your eyes that warn you that a particular bar is loose, or that there's moss on top of that ledge you've never actually seen from above. Successful climbing, and successful night training, is all about putting your awareness into your feet and your hands, getting your mind as close as possible to the obstacles you're working with. What draws us to parkour is the freedom, the beauty. You see someone flying through the air and you feel a primal urge to move. But every jump begins and ends with a point of contact. What goes up must come down. Once the novelty of flight wears off and you really start to push the boundaries and explore the subtleties of movement, you find yourself falling in love with the environment itself. It's your canvas, your springboard, your partner. The gritty feel of brick on your hands or the bass cello hum of a rail beneath your shoes. That moment when you hit the landing and the grip is perfect, and you remember the wall and you know exactly where you are. It puts you in touch with the world in a way that other people who only walk on the street can never really understand. As empowering as the movements of parkour are, what it really boils down to is freedom. Contact is the point, and the point of contact is where the spirit of parkour truly lives. Otherwise, we'd all just be dancers or gymnasts or weightlifters.